Xavier McKinney blocks. Down the sideline he goes. Finally knocked out of bounds.
New Hampshire. Oh, he's got room. Looks. Can he bring him down? No. And then he's knocked down.
Week 12 is officially in the books, and we had another great week full of standout performances, tight games, and big upsets. Welcome to American Baller, where we focus on all things NFL. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell for future videos. Today, we're set to tackle all 13 games, talk about the top players of the week, and break down the updated MVP power rankings. Pittsburgh Steelers vs. Cleveland Browns. The week started off with an AFC North rivalry matchup between the Pittsburgh Steelers and Cleveland Browns. By the time this game came to an end, it was an absolute tundra in Cleveland. This led to it being very difficult to pass toward the tail end of the matchup, but Russell Wilson still had a solid showing, throwing for 270 yards and a touchdown. Nick Chubb looked like his old self, picking up 59 yards and a pair of touchdowns on the ground. Shockingly, the Browns came out on top by a final score of 24-19. This was a huge upset, with the Browns now having a record of 3-8, while the Steelers are still in a very good spot to make the playoffs at 8-3. Tennessee Titans vs. Houston Texans. Next up, we'll move on to the AFC South, where the Tennessee Titans took on the Houston Texans. CJ Stroud continued his rough stretch of games.
Down and long, pressure's coming again for Stroud. Stroud wrapped up throws, pass is complete.
Throwing for 247 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 picks. The Texans struggled to get anything going on the ground, with Joe Mixon picking up only 22 yards on 14 carries. Will Levis had a very solid game, throwing for 278 yards, a pair of touchdowns, and a pick, while Tony Pollard put the Tennessee offense on his back, rushing for 119 yards and a touchdown. This was another shocking upset, with the Titans taking the game by a final score of 32-27. They now improved to 3-8, while the Texans continue their midseason struggle, falling to 7-5. Minnesota Vikings vs. Chicago Bears. Now we have another divisional matchup, this time taking us up to the NFC North, where the Minnesota Vikings took on the Chicago Bears. The quarterbacks for both teams were having their way with nearly identical stat lines. Sam Darnold threw for 330 yards and 2 touchdowns, while Caleb Williams picked up 340 yards and 2 touchdowns through the air. Williams also led the Bears' rushing attack with 33 yards. However, this was no match for what Aaron Jones had in store.
This be the moment. Jones with the carry. Jones to the end zone. The streak.
Rushing for 106 yards and a touchdown. This was a game that came down to the wire, going to overtime. But with 2 minutes left in OT, the Vikings iced the game with a 29-yard field goal. The Vikings continue to prove themselves as one of the top teams in the NFC, now with a record of 9-2, while the Bears now drop to 4-7. Dallas Cowboys vs. Washington Commanders. Next, we move on to the NFC East, where the Dallas Cowboys took on the Washington Commanders. Jaden Daniels showed out in this matchup, throwing for 275 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 2 picks, while leading Washington on the ground as well with an additional 74 yards and a score. But these 2 picks went on to kill the Commanders. Cooper Rush played a very clean game, throwing for 247 yards and a pair of touchdowns. Dallas was able to go into Washington and steal a win, coming out on top by a final score of 34-26. Even with this win, the Cowboys likely still have no chance to make the postseason, now with a record of 7-4, while the Commanders fall to 7-5 with a very concerning loss. New England Patriots vs. Miami Dolphins. The final divisional matchup that we'll look at for a bit takes us to the AFC East, where the New England Patriots played the Miami Dolphins. This was a very dominant matchup for the Dolphins offense, with Tua Tagovailoa throwing for 317 yards and 4 touchdowns. While Devin Achane was only able to pick up 32 yards on the ground and 24 as a pass catcher, he was still able to find the end zone twice. New England struggled to get much going on offense. Rookie Drake May had an alright showing, throwing for 222 yards, a touchdown, and a pick. But this was nowhere near enough to keep pace with Miami. The Dolphins came out on top by a final score of 34-15. Their uphill battle to claw back into the playoff hunt is well on its way, as they're almost back to 500 with a 5-6 record. Kansas City Chiefs vs. Carolina Panthers. Now we have a matchup between the Kansas City Chiefs and the Carolina Panthers. With the Chiefs coming off of their first loss of the year last week against the Buffalo Bills, many believed that this would be a big get-back game for them to right the ship. Despite a strong 269-yard and 3-touchdown performance from Patrick Mahomes, Kansas City didn't look impressive by any means in this matchup. Carolina went on a strong run through the fourth quarter, outscoring the Chiefs 11-3, and it appeared as if the Panthers had what it took to pull off what would have been the biggest upset of the season. But as time expired, the Chiefs nailed a 31-yard field goal to take the game 30-27. They improved to 10-1 and maintained their top spot in the AFC, while the Panthers are now 3-8. This was far from the blowout that many expected from Kansas City, and despite their incredible record, they looked far from impressive so far this season. Tampa Bay Buccaneers vs. New York Giants. Let's move on to a game between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the New York Giants. With the Giants rolling out Tommy DeVito and Drew Lock at the quarterback position, it's clear that they have completely given up on the season. This comes after cutting Daniel Jones earlier on in the week. The main thing on the organization's mind for the remainder of the year is to lose as many games as possible and take another shot at a quarterback in this year's draft. The Bucs were getting anything they wanted on offense. While he failed to find the end zone through the air, Baker Mayfield threw for 294 yards while only throwing 6 interceptions. Tampa Bay thrived on the ground with 4 players scoring rushing touchdowns. Bucky Irving led the way with 87 yards and a touchdown. This was an easy win for the Bucs, coming out on top 30-7. They improved to 5-6 while the Giants continue through what has been an extremely ugly season, now sitting at 2-9. Detroit Lions vs. Indianapolis Colts. Up next, we have a matchup between the Detroit Lions and the Indianapolis Colts. The Lions' elite running backs of Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery carried their offense in this matchup.
3rd down and 8. They keep it on the ground with Gibbs, and Jahmyr Gibbs.
Gibbs picked up 90 yards and found the end zone twice on the ground, while Montgomery rushed for 37 yards and a touchdown. Anthony Richardson was a one-man show for the Colts, throwing for 172 yards and leading the team in rushing yards with 61, but Indy failed to find the end zone even once in this matchup. This was an easy win for the Lions, coming out on top 24-6. They continue to hold on to their top spot in the NFC with a record of 10-1, while the Colts now sit at 5-7. Denver Broncos vs. Las Vegas Raiders. Now we'll take a look at an AFC showdown between the Denver Broncos and Las Vegas Raiders. Bo Nix had a very solid showing, throwing for 273 yards and 2 touchdowns. Over his rookie season, he's made a strong connection with Courtland Sutton. Nix leaned on his wide receiver one heavily in this game, with Sutton pulling in 8 passes for 97 yards and a pair of touchdowns. The Raiders struggled to get much going on offense, however, a strong 4 field goal game from Daniel Carlson kept this matchup competitive. Denver came out on top, winning 29-19. They remain in the playoff hunt with a record of 7-5, while the Raiders are fighting for the top pick in this year's draft with a record of 2-9. Arizona Cardinals vs. Seattle Seahawks. In our final divisional matchup of the week, the Seattle Seahawks took on the Arizona Cardinals in an NFC West showdown. This was a defensive battle with both teams struggling to get much going on offense. Cardinals tight end Trey McBride had a great game, pulling in 12 passes for 133 yards, while Seahawks wideout Jackson Smith-Njigba continued his impressive 2024 campaign with 6 catches for 77 yards and a touchdown. Seattle came out on top 16-6 in a matchup that could go on to have major implications in the NFC West race. Both teams now have a record of 6-5. San Francisco 49ers vs. Green Bay Packers. Now we'll take a look at what was a highly anticipated matchup between the San Francisco 49ers and the Green Bay Packers. Brock Purdy suffered a right shoulder injury that kept him sidelined for this game. With the 49ers forced to start Brandon Allen, they were fighting a very uphill battle. They couldn't get much going on the ground with Christian McCaffrey only able to rush for 31 yards. This was an awful game for the 49ers, with the Packers getting anything they wanted both through the air and on the ground. Jordan Love threw for 163 yards and a pair of touchdowns, while running back Josh Jacobs put on a show, running for 106 yards and 3 touchdowns. This was an absolute blowout, and maybe the final nail in the coffin for the 49ers this season. Green Bay improves to an impressive 8-3 record, while San Francisco falls to 5-6. Philadelphia Eagles vs. Los Angeles Rams. Up next is the Sunday night matchup between the Philadelphia Eagles and the Los Angeles Rams. Everything was clicking in this game for the Eagles offense. The big three of Jalen Hurts, A.J. Brown, and Saquon Barkley all did their thing. Hurts threw for 179 and a touchdown. 109 of those yards in his sole touchdown through the air going to Brown. However, Barkley absolutely stole the show. No matter what the Rams threw at him, they had absolutely no answer for the star running back. Barkley finished the matchup with 255 yards and a pair of touchdowns on only 26 carries. These 255 rushing yards set a single-game franchise record for the Eagles. Matthew Stafford had a very solid game, throwing for 243 yards and 2 touchdowns, but the Rams could not keep pace with their opponents, falling 37-20. Philadelphia is looking very dangerous this year, with a record of 9-2, while the Rams fall to 5-6. Baltimore Ravens vs. Los Angeles Chargers. The Monday night matchup between the Baltimore Ravens and the Los Angeles Chargers cemented another chapter of the Harbaugh Bowl. Both teams have performed very well this season, and they could easily end up meeting again in the postseason. This was a tight game that came down to the wire. A strong fourth quarter surge gave the Ravens the separation they needed, taking the game 30-23. Lamar Jackson did his thing, throwing for 177 yards and 2 touchdowns, along with 15 yards and a score on the ground. While Justin Herbert failed to find the end zone through the air, he still threw for 218 yards and rushed for a touchdown. Chargers running back J.K. Dobbins was forced to exit the game with a knee injury. Looking at his extensive history with knee injuries, this is a very concerning sign from LA's top back. Baltimore took the game by a final score of 30-23, improving to 8-4, while the Chargers still hold strong in the AFC wildcard race with a record of 7-4. Players of the Week. Caleb Williams led all quarterbacks this week with an elite 340 yards through the air. While the Bears still fell in overtime to the Minnesota Vikings 30-27, performances like this from a rookie quarterback is a very promising sign for the future of the Bears. Saquon Barkley's dominant 255-yard showing unsurprisingly led the league in rushing yards this week. Not only this, but it set an Eagles franchise record that will likely remain intact for years to come. To put the cherry on top, this effort on the ground played a big role in their dominant 37-20 win over the Los Angeles Rams. We go back to the Bears-Vikings game where Jordan Addison led all pass catchers this week with 162 receiving yards. Pairing this with the touchdown he contributed, Addison played a huge part in the Vikings narrowly escaping their divisional opponent. Finally, on defense, Indianapolis Colts safety Nick Cross led all defenders this week with 14 tackles, 6 being solo and 8 being assisted. This mainly came as a result of the Lions getting deep into the secondary and Cross playing his role of the team's last line of defense very well. Despite his efforts, the Colts still fell by a score of 24-6. MVP Power Rankings. The MVP race is more and more shaping up as a two-man race this season. Lamar Jackson takes over the top spot after a very impressive showing. On only 22 pass attempts, he was able to pick up 177 yards and 2 touchdowns. But Jackson was also able to get it done with his legs, rushing for 15 yards and a score. Not only this, but he led the Ravens to a very strong fourth quarter run that wound up winning them the game. In second place is Josh Allen. With the Buffalo Bills being on a bye week, there wasn't much that he could do in Week 12 to help his case. However, if he continues to play at the extremely high level he has been following his week off, this will be an MVP race that comes down to the final week. Thank you for tuning in to American Baller. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell for future videos.